What years did you attend here?
44 to 49.
1945 to 1950.
49 to 54.
Started in 1940 and left in 1945, just at the end of VE Day.
While you were here at Harbord, did you join clubs, be on teams? What did you do?
Not really. I was a firm believer in Harbord, but I wasn't good enough to be an athlete. As a matter of fact, now that I think of it, I was part of the Los Parabla, which was a club for school spirit, and I was in a couple of the Los Parabla shows, which they did.
Well, I did swimming, and I was a member of the Latin Club, which was called the Sodalitas Harbortensis.
The Latin Club?
Yes.
I don't think that exists any longer.
I know.
I played on the junior and senior basketball teams. I was a member of the drama club. I was in the Harbord Collegiate Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. I was the foreman of the jury in one of the operettas, and that was a joy.
So I belonged to the chess club, and I played football. They wanted us to organize a hockey team, but I didn't want to get into that. I was also deeply involved in a group called the Air Cadets of Canada that met in this particular building for a while. And I was a young man who knew his way around town.
And if we could recall back, who was your favorite teacher at Harbord Collegiate?
Well, I liked a lot of the teachers, but I think Miss Hislop, who taught French, was such an elegant lady, and I liked French. I knew French from the time I'd lived in Montreal, so I did well at it, and I liked her.
I see. And did she inspire you to become...
She didn't inspire me to become a physician, I can tell you that.
Oh, okay, all right.
I have to tell you, my favorite teacher was Euphrasia Hislop.
And what did...
She taught French, and she was an elegant lady, and I liked her, and I found her as a teacher very inspiring.
And did you know French prior to taking it with her?
No.
There were probably three in order: Mr. Noble, who taught English, Miss Hislop, who wrote Cours Moyen de Français, I think, and she was an elegant teacher, person, and really created the will to learn. I should point out French was probably my worst subject, so that's it. And also music, Mr. Verzel, I think it was, really quite fine and enthusiastic teacher.
My favorite teacher was Elton E. Lent. He was a science teacher, and he challenged me emotionally, spiritually, as well as academically. Wonderful man.
And your favorite subject while you were here at Harbord?
Well, I didn't really have a favorite subject. I liked them all.
History. I loved history then, and I love history now.
None.
And did you know, leaving Harbord, what you would end up doing for a living?
Oh, yeah. I went right into medical school at that point.
I became a pharmacist, but my spare time is studying what's going on in the world. And I love it, and I started off studying it through history. Especially now that I think of it, I really enjoyed American history. It seemed to be so exciting, and Canadian history was just Canadian history.
Well, as a Canadian history teacher, I'll take that to task when I teach my students.
I might say that probably not having an exciting past is better for the people in the country.
Oh, there you go.
Well, at the end of the war, I decided to go into take a trade, so I went to be a jeweler. I spent 5 years in the jewelry trade, and then later on, I spent a few years. Decided that jewelry it was confining. So I worked as a claims officer at the Workmen's Compensation Board, and nothing came to fruition, I guess, until one of the members of provincial parliament asked me if I'd like to go on a hospital board.
What did your teachers dress like back at Harbord?
I mention this to the kids all the time. The teachers did not wear the clothes that they're wearing now. You had to have a tie and a shirt and look nice, and there was no. Sometimes I look at the teachers now and I wonder how can they get away dressed the way they dress now, but that's the style.
Well, they wouldn't wear jeans.
No jeans.
No jeans.
No.
I think they dressed. I can't remember if they wore a tie, but they certainly
Right.
dressed, and they expected the students to dress properly.
Right.
Properly.
And so what would the average young lady be wearing to Harbord Collegiate?
She would be wearing a skirt and a sweater or a blouse.
Yeah.
No pants.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't wear pants, and certainly no bare shoulders.
Properly. But you could tell that the times were tough and they didn't have a great deal of clothing. So it was not unusual to see a teacher wear the same sports jacket or the same suit for a week.
And your fondest memory of Harbord, or memories, or
Fondest memory, I remember the girl I took to the Harbord dance, Miss Harbord, and I was really emotionally pleased that she won it. She deserved it, and from many viewpoints.
And are you the same Morty Katz who designed the monument out front?
I am the same, and that was one of the most spiritual things that I've done in all my years.
And could you? We all see it, and as we come into the school, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure, it's about 20 feet in height, made of polished stainless steel, and the concept behind it was that it's the form of an H, which of course, as you can see, was broken in the middle, which defined the loss of lives that took place, and actually the lives that were cut short by the individuals who were probably 18 and 19 who went to war at that time. Also, the surface had an aspect of reflection, so that when you looked into it, you saw a vision of who could have been you who had died had it been a different time and a different place.
Well, I don't know if I would say it's a fond memory. I don't know if you're aware, Harbord had a strike.
No.
Yes, Harbord struck. It had to do when Walter Graham was principal, and at one of the assemblies, one of the kids made a joke that might be a little, it could be called a little off color, and the principal said, "That's it," and everybody just piled out of the class. Well, the next day, when they rang the bell at noon for class, a bunch of us didn't go in, and that was called the Harbord strike, and we actually got a headline in the Toronto Telegram, which doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, many fond memories. Some of them nice, some of them where we weren't so nice. But I really, it's a very much part of my life, and I have very fond memories of so much of it.
Well, that plays into my next question. So, Are there any embarrassing moments or things that you did at Harbord that you look back and go, oh, maybe I...
There was one very embarrassing thing I did. In grade 10, our English teacher, Mr. Noble, insisted that we do a short story. I couldn't write short stories. I just couldn't.
Right.
So I copied one. Little did I know that de Maupassant was a very famous writer.
Oh.
And Mr. Noble said to me, May, how could you do such a thing? I felt very bad.
Well, probably not so much embarrassing, but a moment of memory is this wonderful teacher, as I said to you, that I learned to hate. I asked him to sit at the front of the class. He says, you don't have to sit at the front of the class. He said, back of the class. Eventually, he managed to get me out of the classroom for about 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And that's when I met my dear friend Morley Wolfe, who went on to law and Tweed's counsel. But eventually Carlisle must have been told something. The principal came back, apologized to me before the class, and I was put back in the class. Many years later, I found out that he had a problem with life. He went to another school. He attacked one of my relatives, same name, in the same manner.
I personally don't have one, but I must tell you one of my close friends at the time, his story. Harbord Collegiate had a swimming pool. At one end was the girls' locker, and one end was the boys' locker. And the boys swam naked. The girls didn't. The boys would usually be first in the pool. And
the boys were supposed to swim naked.
Yes. And we would leave the pool, and as we left the pool, the girls would come in at the other end. One day, the girls came in a little earlier than normal, and there was one person left in the pool, and there was a towel at the edge of the pool, and he had a choice. He could cover himself and run out; everybody would know who he was, or he could put the towel around his head and run out, and they wouldn't know who he was. And he chose the latter, and he ran out and went into the locker room, and Mr. Caldecott said, "Good try, Red."
No, when I remember what I did, I don't worry about not doing it now, but I really can't remember. I would consider myself a modest troublemaker in school, but not to the extent that I would get into trouble to be expelled or anything. Just enough to stay in school, but to be called a bit of a troublemaker.
Now, if you were ever to pass on words of wisdom to students who are walking the halls here at Harbord, what might you say?
Get involved in the extracurricular activities more than being involved in the classroom, and that doesn't deny that you don't do that. I personally found the classes, for the most part, very boring, and as someone mentioned earlier, that some teachers weren't committed to teaching, and so just get involved with the things that you enjoy beyond the classes.
Is it are old ladies supposed to pass on words of wisdom?
Yes, of course they are.
Well, I think that I really enjoyed my high school years, and they certainly set me on the right path for the rest of my life. And I made friendships that have remained to this day. And in fact, our class of 49 had a 60-year reunion, which was very well attended, and then a 65-year lunch, where about 30 or 40 people were there.
That's amazing.
So, enjoy your years at high school. It's hard work, but enjoy it.
Take advantage of the school, because, speaking for myself, the friends I made in the school remained friends all my life. Much more than the university that I went to.
Well, fortunately, students today have very plugged-in parents. And if you're having a problem with the subject, get help. Whether you have to get a tutor, whether you have to have fellow students help you, but you must succeed.
And when you arrived in Toronto, what year?
That would be 1940, October the 22nd, 1940.
So we're in the early days of the Second World War.
Yes.
While you were here at Harbord, were you a member of a club or a team, or did you get involved in any way?
Yes, I did. I went out for the junior football team in grade 10. But then they practiced after school when I had to deliver papers. So I had to give that up. But I got involved in intramural baseball each year. I did finally wind up on the senior football team later on. I spent 1 year on the track team running at varsity for Harbord. I was a cheerleader 1 year, which was a marvelous experience. I really got to know the kids, and I guess made sort of a name for yourself in the school.
And speaking of teachers, did you have a favorite teacher that you can recall?
I had two favorite teachers, Mary Campbell, who was a history teacher, and for me, brought it to life. And of course, part of the course she taught was about Western Canada. And I had been in some of the places that she talked about. The other teacher was Earl Strong, who was an English teacher, who I just loved. He was a good teacher, and I think he saved my bacon on one occasion when I wasn't exactly in the school's good graces.
And while you were at Harbord, did you, as you got into grade 11 and 12 and 13, did you have an idea of what you wanted to do?
I had an idea, but I don't think it was to be. I had leaned towards literature and writing, and perhaps had an idea that I could write not just poetry, but books and so forth. But when I got into university, my dad was back from the Army and he'd had a heart attack. So I had talked to my mother about stopping school at that time. I had a Paperboy's insurance policy, which I cashed in. And my mother said she'd kill me if I quit school. So I stayed on, but I began to get interested in law. And some of my friends were also headed that way. So I decided, well, I'll go along with it and see how it turns out. And as it turned out, it was the right thing to do.
And did you have a favorite subject while you were at Harbord?
History.
Now, as far as teachers are concerned, how did they dress?
I suppose by today's code, quite conservatively, most of the men wore suits, jacket, tie, shirt. Some of the teachers, there were a couple of math teachers and science teachers that wore lab coats.
Okay.
Otherwise, they wore a suit. The female teachers were basically dressed in dark dresses. I don't remember anybody wearing anything that stood out, but they were quite conservative and went with, I guess, what was required in those days.
So, Morley, I'm just going to show you this picture, which you showed me, and you can hold it up so we can see it in the camera.
Sure.
And just pull it in a bit closer to you.
Oh, this way.
Yeah. And you can tell us who those people are.
Okay, that's my dad, who was in the Royal Canadian Engineers.
Okay.
My mom, who was a very loving person. And this kid was about, I guess, 12 years old and had red hair. And as a matter of fact, the kids called me Red at that time, or Torchy, or Brick, or one of those nicknames for
Right.
Redhead.
And how many redheads were were walking the halls back at Harbord?
Not many.
Not many, eh?
Not many.
And this is a picture of a young man.
Well, that would be me around 1943, 43 in the Royal Canadian Air Cadets. That was Venabia Squadron 219. And I guess that was a wartime project. One of my best friends, Art Downs, was in the same group. Dan Soberman was in the same group, so eventually, I suppose if the war had continued, you could see where we were going.
Right. And thankfully, it ended.
It ended.
All right. And I would like to thank you for taking the time to come down and be interviewed, and look forward to seeing you on the 28th and 29th.
My pleasure. I'll look forward to seeing you too.
Thank you.
Take care.